The Galactic Imperium had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. Their fleets were countless. Their conquered worlds numbered in the tens of thousands. Every species in the known galaxy had bent the knee to their power or faced complete destruction. The Imperial Navy was the largest military force ever assembled in the history of the universe, and no one had ever dared to challenge them. The very idea of resistance was considered madness. This was the reality of the galaxy. This was the order that had existed for longer than most species could remember. And then everything changed in a single moment. Deep in the Outer Rim territories, a sensor station picked up something impossible. A ship had emerged from uncharted space. It was not an Imperial vessel. It matched no known design in any database. The officers at the station stared at their screens in confusion, and then in growing fear as they analyzed what they were seeing. The ship was massive. It was built with hard angles and brutal efficiency that seemed almost primitive compared to the elegant curves of Imperial design. But the energy readings coming from it were anything but primitive. They were off every scale the sensors could measure. Admiral received the alert aboard his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. He was a veteran of 60 years in the Imperial Navy and had crushed rebellions on 17 worlds. His features showed no emotion as he read the report, but his 4 eyes narrowed with interest. An unknown vessel in Imperial space was unusual. An unknown vessel with this kind of power signature was unprecedented. He ordered the Third Fleet to intercept. 300 warships changed course and moved to surround the intruder. It was more than enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Against a single ship, it was absolute overkill, or so believed. The unknown vessel did not attempt to flee. It maintained its course at a steady speed, almost as if it was waiting for them. As the Imperial fleet drew closer, they got their first clear visual of the intruder. The ship was gray and angular, covered in what appeared to be weapon emplacements. Strange symbols were painted on its hull in a language no one recognized, and on its side in large letters was a name: USS Valiant. On the bridge of that ship, Captain Daniel watched the alien fleet surround him. He was a tall man in his early 50s with gray hair at his temples and calm brown eyes that had seen more battles than he cared to count. He had commanded ships for 30 years and had faced death more times than he could remember. But this was different. This was first contact with an alien civilization. Everything humanity did in the next few hours would shape the future of his species. Commander Lisa Morgan stood beside him at the communication station. She was younger than, in her late 30s, with short hair and a sharp mind that had earned her a place on this historic mission. She had been monitoring the alien transmissions since they first detected the fleet. "They are hailing us, Captain," she said. "The universal translator is still processing their language, but I think we have enough for basic communication." Nodded, put them on screen. The main flickered and then displayed the face of Admiral. He was unlike anything had ever seen. His head was covered in a hard carapace. His 4 eyes were solid black. His mouth was a complex arrangement of mandibles that clicked as he spoke. But there was something familiar in his expression. It was the arrogance of a conqueror looking at something he considered beneath him. "Unknown vessel," said through the translator. "You have entered sovereign Imperial space without authorization. You will identify yourself immediately. You will power down your weapons. You will prepare to be boarded for inspection. Failure to comply will result in your immediate destruction." Remained perfectly still. Behind him, his crew continued their work without a hint of panic. Lieutenant Brooks sat at the tactical station, his fingers hovering over the weapons controls. He was young, barely 30, but he had the fastest reflexes had ever seen. Dr. Amy Price monitored the science station, recording everything for later analysis. Chief Engineer watched the power distribution systems, ready to give the ship everything it had at a moment's notice. "Admiral," said, his voice calm and measured, "my name is Captain Daniel of the Earth Alliance vessel Valiant. We come from a world called Earth, far beyond your borders. We are here on a mission of exploration and peaceful contact. We mean you no harm," made a sound that the translator interpreted as laughter. Peaceful contact. You enter Imperial space with a warship and speak of peace. Your intentions are irrelevant. You will submit to Imperial authority or you will be destroyed. There is no third option. Glanced at Lieutenant Brooks, who gave him a small nod. The tactical officer had completed his analysis of the alien fleet. 300 ships, each one roughly equivalent to a heavy cruiser by Earth standards. They carried plasma-based weapons and missile systems. Their shields were energy-based. All of this information flowed through the Valiant's combat computer, which had already calculated firing solutions for every ship in the fleet. "Admiral, I need you to understand something," said. "We did not come here looking for a fight. We came here hoping to meet new species and perhaps build something together. But I also need you to understand that we will not be boarded. We will not surrender, and we will not submit to any authority that we did not choose to recognize." Leaned forward. "You are one ship, I have 300. Your defiance is noted and will be punished." "You have 300 ships," agreed. "And I have one. But before you give the order to attack, I want you to consider something. My ship just traveled farther than any vessel in your fleet has ever gone. We did it alone. We did it without knowing what we would find. That should tell you something about my people." "It tells me your people are foolish." "No, Admiral, it tells you that my people do not know how to be afraid," smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "We have a saying on Earth, never tell a human the odds, we do not listen anyway." Stared at him for a long moment, then he cut the transmission. Commander Morgan looked at her captain. "That went well." "It went exactly as expected," replied. "They were never going to let us leave peacefully. An empire like this one does not tolerate anything it cannot control." He straightened in his chair. "All hands battle stations. Lieutenant Brooks, arm all weapons. Chief, bring the reactors to full power. And someone get me a cup of coffee. This is going to be a long day." Across the void of space, 300 Imperial warships prepared to fire on a single human vessel. They had no doubt about the outcome. They had never been challenged. They had never been defeated. They were the masters of the galaxy. They were about to learn that the galaxy had just become a much more dangerous place. Admiral gave the order to fire, and 300 Imperial warships unleashed their fury upon a single target. Plasma bolts streaked across the darkness of space. Missiles launched by the hundreds. Energy beams carved through the void. The combined firepower was enough to shatter a small planet. Every officer in the Imperial fleet expected to see the alien vessel vanish in a ball of fire. It did not happen. The Valiant moved. It did not move like any ship the Imperials had ever seen. It twisted and rolled and accelerated in ways that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Plasma bolts passed through empty space where the ship had been a fraction of a second before. Missiles found their targets confused by electronic countermeasures they could not understand. Energy beams struck shields that flared bright blue and held firm. And then the Valiant fired back. Rail guns hurled tungsten projectiles at a fraction of the speed of light. They punched through Imperial shields like they were made of paper, but they did not strike hulls. They struck engines. They struck weapon systems. They struck communication arrays. Every shot was precise. Every shot was calculated. Every shot was designed to disable, not destroy. On the bridge of the Valiant, Captain watched the battle unfold with cold efficiency. Lieutenant Brooks called out targets and fired solutions. Chief managed power distribution to keep shields and weapons at maximum effectiveness. Dr. Price monitored the alien ships for any sign of adaptive response. Commander Morgan coordinated the damage control teams that rushed to seal minor hull breaches. 15 ships disabled, Brooks reported. 20, 25. They are adjusting their formation, but their coordination is poor. They have never faced an enemy like us. They have never faced an enemy at all, said. Not a real one. Keep firing. Disable their weapons and engines. I want that fleet dead in the water, but I do not want a single casualty on either side." It was an insane order. They were fighting 300 warships with one. Any other captain would have focused on survival, on destroying as many enemy ships as possible before being overwhelmed, but was not fighting to survive. He was fighting to send a message. The battle lasted 47 minutes. When it was over, the Imperial Third Fleet drifted helplessly in space. 283 ships had been disabled. Their weapons were slag. Their engines were cold. Their communication systems were destroyed. The remaining 17 ships had fled into hyperspace, carrying tales of horror back to the Imperial core worlds. Admiral sat in the darkness of his powerless flagship and stared at the that showed the human vessel cruising past his broken fleet. He had lost everything: his career, his honor, his understanding of how the universe worked, and the humans had not killed a single member of his crew. That was the part that haunted him most. They could have destroyed every ship. They had the power. They had the opportunity, but they had chosen mercy, and somehow that made them more terrifying than any enemy he had ever faced. On Prime, the capital world of the Galactic Imperium, Supreme Chancellor Ash received the news in his throne room. He was an ancient creature, his species, one of the founding members of the Imperium. He had ruled for 300 years and had seen countless challenges to imperial authority. All of them had been crushed without mercy. But this was different. This was not a rebellion by conquered slaves. This was not a border dispute with a minor power. This was something new, something that had come from beyond the edges of known space, something that had just humiliated the Imperial Navy in a way that had never happened before. "Who are these humans?" Ash demanded. His voice echoed through the vast chamber where his advisors had gathered. "Where did they come from? How is this possible?" Intelligence Director N stepped forward. She was a tall, thin creature with silver skin and eyes that could see in spectrums no human could perceive. Her job was to know everything that happened in the galaxy, and for the first time in her career, she had failed. "They come from a world called Earth, Supreme Chancellor. It is located in an uncharted region beyond the Outer Rim. Our scouts never explored that sector. It was deemed too poor in resources to merit attention." "Too poor in resources," Ash repeated. "And yet they build ships that make our dreadnoughts look like children's toys. Explain this to me." N hesitated. "We have analyzed the data from the battle. Their technology is not universally superior to ours. In some areas they are actually behind us, but their weapons and defensive systems are remarkably advanced. It appears they have spent their entire history fighting wars, not against other species, against each other." The chamber fell silent. The idea was difficult to comprehend. A species that had achieved space travel while still fighting among themselves. A species that had honed the art of war to perfection before ever leaving their home world. It was madness. It was terrifying. "There is more," N continued. "The human captain made a statement before the battle. He said they came in peace. He said they were looking for new species to meet. He said they meant no harm. And yet they attacked our fleet." "No, Supreme Chancellor. We attacked them. They defended themselves. They disabled our ships, but they killed no one. They showed mercy." Ash considered this. In 12,000 years of Imperial history, mercy had never been shown to enemies of the Imperium. It was seen as weakness. It was seen as foolishness. But perhaps there was another way to interpret it. Perhaps the humans were so confident in their power that they did not need to kill. Perhaps mercy was simply another weapon in their arsenal. Meanwhile, aboard the Valiant, Captain held a meeting with his senior officers in the ship's conference room. The battle was over, but their mission had only begun. "We came here to make contact," said. "We have certainly done that, but what we found is not what any of us expected." Dr. Price brought up her analysis on the room's main screen. "The Imperium controls over 20,000 inhabited worlds. Hundreds of different species live under their rule, but from what I can determine, only a handful of those species joined willingly. The rest were conquered, enslaved. Commander Morgan frowned. An empire built on slavery. An empire built on the assumption that might makes right, said. They have never faced a true challenge. They have never had to justify their existence. They simply took what they wanted because no one could stop them. And now, Lieutenant Brooks asked. Was quiet for a moment. Through the conference room's window, he could see the stars stretching out into infinity. Somewhere out there, 20,000 worlds waited in chains. Somewhere out there, billions of beings lived and died under the boot of imperial oppression. Now they have met humanity, said, and nothing will ever be the same. Chief Engineer worked through the night to complete the modification. It was not a weapon. It was not a shield enhancement. It was something far more dangerous. It was a communication system capable of broadcasting across the entire Imperium simultaneously. It is ready, Captain, reported the next morning. He was a heavy-set man with graying hair and hands that had built and repaired more starship systems than he could count. We can piggyback on their own relay network. Every communication satellite, every broadcast station, every ship with a receiver will pick up our signal. They cannot block it without destroying their own infrastructure. Captain nodded slowly. He had made his decision during the long hours after the battle. The Valiant could not fight the entire Imperial Navy. Even with their technological advantages, they were still one ship against thousands. But there was another way to fight, a way that did not require weapons at all. Commander Morgan said, "Are you ready?" Lisa Morgan stood in front of the camera that would broadcast her captain's message across the stars. She had written the speech herself, working with Dr. Price to ensure the translator would convey the meaning accurately. "Ready, Captain." Took his position. He straightened his uniform. He thought about the billions of beings who would see this message. Slaves and masters, conquerors and conquered, an entire galaxy that had never known anything but imperial rule, and he began to speak. "My name is Captain Daniel. I come from a world called Earth. Until yesterday, my people did not know that life existed beyond our own star system. We came here hopping to meet new friends. We came here hopping to learn about the wonders of the universe. What we found instead was an empire built on chains." The message traveled at the speed of light through the Imperial relay network. It reached the core worlds within minutes. It reached the outer rim within hours. Every screen on every world in the Imperium showed the face of a human speaking words that no one had ever dared to speak before. "We have seen your fleets. We have seen your power. We have seen what you do to those who cannot defend themselves. And we want you to know something. We are not afraid of you. We will never be afraid of you, because we have seen empires before. We have seen tyrants who thought they would rule forever, and we have seen them fall." On the mining world of, a species called the watched the broadcast in their underground barracks. They were small, furry creatures with large eyes adapted to the darkness of the mines where they had labored for 3,000 years. Their ancestors had been free once. They had built cities and created art and dreamed of the stars. Then the Imperium had come. A young named stared at the screen. She had never seen anything like the human captain. He spoke with a confidence that seemed impossible. He looked at the camera as if he was looking directly at her, and his words stirred something in her heart that she had never felt before. "We do not seek to conquer you," continued. "We do not want your worlds or your resources or your obedience. We want something far simpler. We want you to be free. Every species, every world, every being who has ever dreamed of something better than the chains they were born into. You deserve to choose your own destiny." On the agricultural world of, the plant-like listened to the broadcast through their vast network of interconnected roots. They had been slaves of the Imperium for 5,000 years, forced to grow food for worlds that had once been their trading partners. They had almost forgotten what freedom felt like. Almost. "I know you are afraid," said. I know the Imperium seems too powerful to challenge. I know they have crushed every rebellion, silenced every voice of dissent, but I want you to understand something about my people. We have fought against impossible odds before. We have stood against tyrants who controlled everything. And we have won. Not because we were stronger, not because we had better weapons. We won because we refused to give up. The message reached Prime. Supreme Chancellor Ash watched it in his private chambers with growing fury. He ordered his technicians to shut down the broadcast. They tried. They failed. The human signal was woven into the very fabric of Imperial communications. Cutting it off would mean cutting off everything. "Find that ship," Ash commanded. "Find it and destroy it. I do not care what it costs. I do not care how many fleets we lose. That vessel must be eliminated." But even as the Chancellor gave his orders, the damage was already done. The message had been heard. Across 20,000 worlds, beings who had known nothing but slavery their entire lives suddenly saw another possibility. They saw a species that had come from beyond the stars, that had defeated an Imperial fleet without killing anyone, that spoke of freedom as if it was something real. Anna put down her mining tool. Around her, others did the same. They looked at each other with expressions that mixed fear and hope in equal measure. No one spoke. No one needed to. On the stop their harvesting. Their roots carried a simple message from one plant to the next across the entire planet. "Wait. Listen. Something is changing." Captain finished his broadcast with words that would echo through history. "The Imperium has told you that resistance is futile. They have told you that they are eternal, unchanging, invincible. They are wrong. Nothing built on the suffering of others can last forever. The universe does not work that way. Sooner or later, every chain is broken. Every wall falls down. Every tyrant meets their end. The only question is whether you will be there to see it." He paused. "We will be here, waiting, ready to help anyone who wants to be free. You are not alone anymore." The screen went dark. Across the galaxy, beings of every shape and size sat in stunned silence. Some dismissed the message as propaganda. Some feared it was a trap. But many, more than the Imperium would ever admit, felt something stir in their hearts. A tiny flame of hope that they had thought was dead forever. Lieutenant Brooks reported to the captain that Imperial fleets were mobilizing across the galaxy. Thousands of ships were being recalled from patrol duty. The largest military operation in Imperial history was being organized, and it was all aimed at one target. "They are coming for us," Brooks said. "Every ship they have." Nodded. He had expected this. He had planned for it. "How long do we have?" 3 weeks before the main fleet arrives. Smaller groups will reach us sooner." 3 weeks. It was not much time, but it would have to be enough. "Then we had better get to work," said. "We have a galaxy to wake up." Imperial Grand Fleet assembled in a region of empty space called the Null Zone. It was chosen specifically because there were no planets nearby, no asteroids to hide behind, no stellar phenomena to provide cover. There would be no escape for the human vessel. There would be no tricks. There would only be overwhelming force. 8,000 warships gathered in formations that stretched across thousands of kilometers. Battleships and cruisers and destroyers and carriers. The combined firepower was enough to destroy a star. It was the largest military force ever assembled in Imperial history, and it was all directed at a single target. Fleet Admiral commanded from his flagship, the Wrath of Empire. He was the most decorated military officer in the Imperium. He had conquered 17 worlds personally. He had crushed 4 major rebellions. He had never known defeat in 300 years of service. But as he reviewed the tactical data from his humiliation, he felt something unfamiliar in his chest, something that might have been doubt. The humans fought differently. They did not simply try to destroy their enemies. They broke them systematically, precisely, with an efficiency that was almost artistic. Their weapons were devastating but controlled. Their tactics were impossible to predict, and they showed no fear whatsoever. Even facing 300 ships, they had not hesitated. Now they faced 8,000. All ships report ready, Admiral, his tactical officer announced. The human vessel has been located at the designated coordinates. They are not attempting to flee. Studied the sensor display. The human ship sat alone in the void, surrounded by empty space in every direction. It looked so small, so fragile. He almost felt pity for its crew. Almost. All ships advance, commanded. Standard attack formation. We will overwhelm them with sheer numbers. No matter how advanced their technology, they cannot fight all of us at once. The Grand Fleet began to move. 8,000 engines flared. 8,000 ships accelerated toward a single point. It was like watching a tidal wave approach a small island. There was a terrible beauty to it. On the bridge of the Valiant, Captain watched them come. His face showed no expression. His hands rested calmly on the arms of his chair. Around him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency, as if this was just another day, just another mission. Enemy fleet will be in weapons range in 12 minutes, Lieutenant Brooks reported. Acknowledged. Commander Morgan looked at her captain. She had served with him for 15 years. She had seen him face impossible situations before, but this was beyond anything they had ever encountered. Even with all their technological advantages, they could not fight 8,000 ships and win. Daniel, she said quietly, if this does not work. It will work, replied. It has to work, because if it does not, everything we have done here will be for nothing. He turned to a young officer at an auxiliary station. Ensign was barely 25 years old. She had graduated from the academy just 2 years ago. This was her first deep space assignment, and she had been given one of the most important tasks in human history. Ensign, status of the packages. Checked her console. Her hands were steady despite the fear she must have felt. All 412 deployed across the engagement zone, Captain. They are in position and ready to activate on your command. Good work, Ensign. The packages were not weapons. They were small devices, each one no larger than a basketball. They had been launched from the Valiant over the past 3 weeks and positioned throughout the null zone. They were completely passive, invisible to Imperial sensors, and they were about to change everything. The Imperial fleet entered weapons range. 8,000 ships opened fire simultaneously. The void lit up with plasma bolts and energy beams and missiles beyond counting. It was the most concentrated barrage of firepower ever released in a single moment. Nothing could survive it. The Valiant did not try to evade. Its shields flared as they absorbed the first wave of fire. Warning lights began to flash across the bridge. Damage reports came in from every section. The ship shuddered under impacts that would have vaporized any Imperial vessel. Shields at 60%, Chief reported. We cannot take much more of this, Captain. We will not have to, pressed a button on his chair. All packages activate. Across the null zone, 412 small devices came to life. They were electronic warfare platforms, designed to broadcast on every frequency the Imperial ships used for targeting, communication, and coordination. They flooded the void with signals that mimicked Imperial command codes, false sensor readings, and contradictory orders. The result was instant chaos. Imperial targeting systems went haywire. Ships that had been firing in perfect coordination suddenly could not tell friend from foe. Automated defense systems locked onto nearby Imperial vessels instead of the Valiant. Communication channels filled with static and conflicting commands. And then the shooting really began. Imperial ships began firing on each other. Missiles launched at the Valiant found Imperial cruisers instead. Energy beams meant for the human vessel carved through Imperial battle lines. Formations that had been perfectly maintained for centuries dissolved into confusion as captains tried desperately to regain control. The Valiant moved. It slipped through the chaos like a ghost, protected by the very confusion it had created. Lieutenant Brooks fired with precision that bordered on supernatural, targeting engines and weapon systems and communication arrays. One by one, Imperial ships went dark. Admiral watched in horror as his fleet tore itself apart. All ships cease fire, cease fire. But his orders could not be heard through the electronic storm. His fleet could not respond to commands they could not receive. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it was over, the Imperial Grand Fleet was broken. 3,000 ships had been disabled or destroyed, most by friendly fire. The remaining 5,000 had scattered, their coordination shattered, their formations in ruins. And the Valiant hung in the void, battered and but unbroken. Its shields were down, its hull was damaged, but it was still there. Captain looked at the debris field that surrounded his ship. Thousands of Imperial vessels drifted helplessly in space. Millions of Imperial crew members sat in darkness, waiting for rescue that might never come. He had won. Against impossible odds, against the largest fleet in galactic history, he had won. But there was no celebration on the bridge of the Valiant. There was only exhaustion and the quiet knowledge that the war was far from over. "Send a message to the Imperial survivors," said. "Tell them we will provide assistance to any ship that needs it, medical supplies, emergency power, whatever they need." Morgan stared at him. "After everything they tried to do to us." "That is exactly why we do it," replied. "Because we are not like them, and we never will be." News of the Grand Fleet's destruction spread across the galaxy like wildfire. It traveled through official channels and unofficial ones. It passed from world to world, from species to species, from slave to slave. And everywhere it went, it carried the same impossible truth. The Imperium had been defeated, not by another great power, not by a coalition of conquered worlds. By a single ship from a species no one had ever heard of. On Prime, Supreme Chancellor Ash sat alone in his throne room. The reports from the null zone lay scattered around him. 3,000 ships lost, the Grand Fleet in disarray, and the human vessel still intact, still broadcasting messages of hope to every corner of the galaxy. He had ruled the Imperium for 300 years. He had inherited an empire that had stood for 12,000, and now he watched it crumble around him, not from military defeat but from something far more dangerous. The conquered worlds were rising, not all at once, not in any coordinated fashion, but in 1,000 small rebellions that his remaining forces could not suppress. Onda had seized control of the mining complexes. They had taken the Imperial overseers prisoner but had not harmed them. They were waiting, they said, waiting to see what would happen next. Onda had stopped all food shipments to the Imperial core worlds. Without those shipments, billions would face starvation within months. On dozens of other worlds, similar acts of defiance by the day. The Imperium was not falling, not yet, but it was fracturing in ways that could not be repaired by force alone. 3 weeks after the battle, the first ships from Earth arrived. They were not warships. They were diplomatic vessels and humanitarian ships and construction craft. They carried supplies and medicine and engineers ready to help anyone who needed it. And they carried something else, a message from the government of Earth. The lead ship was the EAS Horizon. It carried Ambassador Cole, Earth's newly appointed representative to the galaxy. She was in her 60s, with white hair and sharp blue eyes that had negotiated peace treaties on 3 continents. When she had been asked to take this assignment, she had not hesitated for a moment. Ambassador Cole met with Captain aboard the Valiant. The ship was still undergoing repairs from the battle. Scorch marks covered its hull. Entire sections had been sealed off due to damage, but it was still flying. It was still fighting. "You have created quite a situation, Captain," Cole said as they sat in his ready room. Smiled wearily. He had not slept more than a few hours in the past 3 weeks. That was the general idea, Ambassador. "The Imperium is requesting negotiations. They want to discuss terms for a ceasefire." "I am sure they do. Their fleet is broken. Their economy is collapsing. Their conquered worlds are in open revolt. They have no leverage left. Cole nodded. And the conquered worlds, what about them? Several have already sent messages requesting formal relations with Earth. A dozen others. They want to know if we will protect them, if we will help them build something new. It was the question that would define humanity's role in the galaxy for generations to come. They could walk away. They could take their ship and go home and let the Imperium sort out its own problems. Or they could stay. They could commit themselves to the longest and most difficult task humanity had ever undertaken. They could help build a galaxy where freedom meant something. Cole looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, 20,000 worlds waited for an answer. "What do you recommend, Captain?" Was quiet for a long moment. He thought about his crew, about the sacrifices they had made, about the battles they had fought. He thought about the young who had sent a message thanking them for giving her hope. He thought about all the beings across the galaxy who had watched his broadcast and dared to dream of something better. "We did not come here to conquer," he said finally. "We came here to explore, to meet new species, to learn about the universe. But what we found was a galaxy in chains. And I do not believe we can simply ignore that, not and still call ourselves human." Ambassador Cole smiled. "That is what I thought you would say." The negotiations with the Imperium lasted 6 months. They were difficult and contentious and often seemed on the verge of collapse. But in the end, an agreement was reached. The Imperium would grant independence to any world that requested it. They would release all prisoners held for political crimes. They would accept human observers to ensure compliance. It was not a perfect solution. Many worlds chose to remain part of the Imperium, either from fear or from genuine preference. The Imperium itself survived, diminished but not destroyed. And there were those who argued that humanity had not gone far enough, that the entire system should have been dismantled. But Captain knew better than anyone that perfect solutions did not exist. Change came slowly. Freedom was not a gift that could be given. It had to be earned, protected, defended. The best humanity could do was provide an example, to show the galaxy that another way was possible. 1 year after the Valiant first entered Imperial space, a ceremony was held on the newly independent world of. Captain was invited as a guest of honor. He stood before a crowd of the small furry creatures who had worked in the mines for 3,000 years and watched as their flag was raised for the first time. A young approached him after the ceremony. It was the same young woman who had watched his broadcast in the underground barracks, who had put down her mining tool and refused to pick it up again. "Thank you," she said in carefully practiced English. "You gave us something we had forgotten. You gave us hope." Knelt down so he could look her in the eyes. "We did not give you anything," he said gently. "You always had hope. We just reminded you that it was there." Considered this for a moment, then she smiled. "Then thank you for reminding us." Looked up at the sky. Somewhere up there the Valiant was waiting. There were more worlds to visit, more species to meet, more chains to break. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders and terrors in equal measure. But for the first time in 12,000 years, it was also full of hope. And that was just the beginning.